Fellow Toastmasters, I was up in Tacoma, Washington recently and talking to my younger brother, Joe, who's about 15 years younger than me. In the course of the conversation, he was in front of my dad. He turned to me and said, "Eric, you know, sometimes you're a real asshole." And I looked back at him and I said, "You know, Joe, you're the only one I allow to call me that." My dad started laughing. He thought that was hilarious. I have a story that I'd like to share with you about growing up with my dad and what he taught me when I was 5 years old, which was 45 years ago. I used to live in Washington, D.C. It was back in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And when my mother got to a point where she could no longer handle the hyperactive older little 5-year-old that was there, otherwise known as me, she would say, Eric, why don't you go running around the block and get some of that energy out? And I'd say, okay. So I'd go running around the block, which is really interesting because back in those days, a 5-year-old running around the block was normal and it was safe. Nowadays, you might actually be accused of child abuse if you sent your 5-year-old to run around the block, but not back then. It was safe. It was normal. So the next week, she couldn't handle it, or, you know, she was seeing that I was still very rambunctious. She said, run around the block again, Eric. And I was thinking, I really don't want to run around the block. Where do I want to go? Oh, I remember. And I remembered that about 3 or 4 weeks earlier, I had been at a birthday party with a gentleman that was about 5 or 6 doors down. And I was in their backyard, and the mother had said to everyone at the birthday party, stay away from the fence. We're putting a new fence up. The fence has a bunch of nails that are sticking out of it. Some of the fence posts are on the ground. We don't want anybody stepping on one of the nails that's in a fence post. So as soon as she wasn't looking, I had immediately gone over to the fence post. And I was sitting there with the little nail coming out, and I was scratching the bottom of my foot, and I thought it was so exciting to be breaking all the rules. And then she walked out of the back door and said, hey everyone, cake! Cake! I love cake! Ah! Ah! And I'm looking down at a nail sticking through my foot. Well, I remember that story. As I remember back, I also remember the aftermath, because for the next week, the tetanus shot that I had previously been given was not very good. So my mouth refused to open for about a week, and they had to feed me through a straw. And I lost a little bit of weight. So when my mom said, okay, Eric, run around the block, go get some of your energy out, I thought, where do I go? Where do I go? I know. I'm going to go torment that lady who tried to give me free cake. Not exactly a logical response, but anyway. So I went running down the block, and I rang on her doorbell. She didn't answer. Aha! So I went into her backyard, and she had this stand-up pool. You had to actually climb up on a ladder to look over the top. And I proceeded to take all of the fence posts, one of which had crucified me a couple weeks earlier, and I threw them in her pool. And that was so much fun, I decided, okay, now I'm going to go get all of her other lawn furniture, and I threw that in the pool. And then I went and I said, oh, she's got a hose here. And do you know how hard it is to sink a hose underneath the water? I was up there dangling over the edge, and I don't know how to swim, by the way, but I managed to sink that hose to the bottom of the pool without falling in and drowning. And then I ran home, and my mom didn't know where I'd been, but I'd been gone 10, 15 minutes. She thought I'd run around the block. So that was great. I got away with vandalism and destruction. Well, about another week went by, and she said, Eric, go run around the block again. So this time, I went back to the same place, to the scene of the crime, but I had forgotten to ring the front doorbell first to make sure the woman wasn't home. So I'm in the back. I'm not that bright back then. So I'm in the back, and I'm throwing all of her crap back into the pool, and she comes out and screams at me and starts chasing me. And then, if I was smart, there was a bully that was on the other side of the block, and I had tried to get out of running around the block by telling my mother, you know, there's a bully over there. Her response was, well, when you get to the bully's house, just run faster. So if I was clever, I would have just run over into the bully's backyard, and then he would have gotten in trouble. But once again, I ran straight back to my own mother, and that's when my mom said, wait till your dad gets home. Well, I sat in fear for about 45 minutes until my dad came home, and when he heard the story, he took his glass and threw it against the wall, and I would relate the rest of the salacious details, but there's no need for that or any type of historical revisionism to hide what actually occurred. But suffice it to say that my dad was the captain and I was the corporal, and he at that point engaged in some loving, disciplined corporal punishment. Now, there are some people who think that corporal punishment doesn't work. I can tell you from experience that if it's done correctly, it is something you will never, ever, ever forget. And you will not repeat those sins again. You will learn your lesson. I learned my lesson. And I will tell you that I am who I am today as a result of that correction. I was heading towards becoming one of the most famous bank robbers of all time. But after my dad corrected me, I ended up becoming who I am today, which is a God-fearing, property-preserving Catholic conservative. Yep, that was the way I was raised. So, I would like to contrast that with how I have raised my children, because things have changed over the last couple of generations. So, my oldest son was a lot like me, and I sent him to Christian school over here on Greenfield Drive, Christian Unified. It's great school, had a lot of discipline, but my son was a lot like me. He was hyperactive. In fact, he inherited not only my hyperactivity, but his mother's and my wife's Italian genes. So he became basically an anarchist also. So when you add the anarchist and the hyperactivity, the principal actually caught him one time trying to shimmy up the flagpole, and was about halfway up before she was able to drag him down. So that tells you just a little bit about how rambunctious my son was. Well, I was lucky because the principal who was in charge when my firstborn son went to school, I forget her name, but let's just call her Principal Virtue. And she had been raised by a family very similar to the family that raised me. So her idea of disciplining children was to take away recess or put a dunce cap on them, have them face the corner, or make them write 10,000 sentences on what they can do to improve their behavior, or not giving them dessert, or making them do push-ups, or something along the lines of what I consider to be normal discipline that probably each and every one of us in this room has experienced at one time or another. Still, he didn't obey. And so I got a call one day to come and discipline my son. Or actually, they called me to say, come and pick him up. This is like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's like, oh, do I have to? Can't you control him? No, not anymore. We can't control him. Come pick him up. Well, isn't my wife around? I mean, what does she really do during the day? Can't she go do this? That didn't get anywhere either. So I ended up having to go get my son, and when I got there, I looked at Principal Virtue, and I said, well, now what do you want me to do? And she said, well, we can't handle him. You need to go do something with him. And I said, well, do you have a spare room here that has some soundproofing? She said, yes, we do. Here you go. We'll go unlock it for you. And she could barely prevent the smile from crossing her mouth. She had tried her hardest to instill some discipline in my son and was getting nowhere, and she was going to get exactly what she wanted, a better performing son, disciplined by her father. So I went, and I was his captain, and he was my corporal, and I engaged in some loving discipline, corporal punishment. And I'll tell you what, when it's done right, the person who's delivering it hurts probably just as much as the person who's getting it. My son has an iron rear end. My hand was close to falling off by the time I was done, and he didn't even, I don't think more than one tear came down his face. But anyways, when I brought him back to the office, they were so impressed and so happy that I was with their discipline program that I think Principal Virtue actually checked out to see whether I was married or not. So, but seeing the ring, she just backed off a little bit, but she was happy camper. And my son went back to school, didn't lose anything more than 10 or 15 minutes of studying, and now he's over as an engineer in San Diego State University, getting really good grades, and is about ready to graduate. he's turning out the way he's supposed to, as a professional, as a person who obeys the rules, as a good, God-fearing Catholic conservative. So, what happened to my second son? Well, the whole world has changed in the last 10 years. So there's a new principal over at Christian Unified, and my son's in 6th grade. And I get a call from this principal, and I don't remember what this principal's name is, but let's call her Principal Wishy-Washy, Loosey-Goosey, Mamby-Pamby, Molly-Collyism. So she calls me up and says, you need to come take care of your son. I said, well, okay, what did he do? He called somebody a name. I said, really? What did he say? He told somebody that he wasn't good at math. I'm like, what? I'm having to deal with this? Can't you guys deal with this? So anyway, I have to go down there, and I'm looking at Principal Wishy-Washy, Loosey-Goosey, Mamby-Pamby, Molly-Collyism, and I said, have you tried to discipline my son if he hurt this guy's feeling? I mean, first of all, in our day, this was not a call the parents type offense. Don't you guys allow people to work stuff out? Isn't there a hierarchy on the playground that people can work out on their own? And she looked at me, oh, no, that would be bullying. We don't allow any bullying at our school. What's the matter with you? Oh, okay, now I know who I'm dealing with here. I said, so, if he hurt this guy's feelings, did you force him to apologize? Well, she didn't want to apologize. I said, well, did you force him to write 10,000 sentences on why he's being a bully and how he should be better behavior in class? Oh, we would never do that. Well, why not? Well, that would make him not like writing. I said, what? I said, did you put him in a corner and put a dunce cap on his head and make him feel ashamed? Oh, we would never do that. Why not? Well, that would make him hate coming to school. What? I said, did you do anything? Did you prevent him from going to recess? No. If he doesn't go to recess, he won't get any of his energy out. I said, well, that's the first thing you said that I agree with. Did you make him go out on recess and force him to sprint, the entire time he was out there till he was so exhausted he never wanted it to happen again? Oh, no, we wouldn't do that. Then he would hate school and he might fall down and get asthma, and then you'd end up suing us for torturing your son. I said, well, hold on here. I'm giving you the right to do what you need to do to discipline my son, and you don't want to take it. I'm trying to support you. Probably unlike every other helicopter parent who comes in here who thinks that you should be easier on my kid, I want you to be harder on him. Can't you do that? No, we wouldn't do that. We can't. That's why we brought you here. Really? So you want me to somehow discipline my son because he called somebody not good at math? Oh, well, he also in dodgeball threw a ball at his head. Isn't that the whole point of dodgeball? When I grew up, we all loved hitting somebody in the head with a dodgeball. And that guy would bleed a little bit, maybe even go cry. He'd come back in an hour and punch us or throw a ball at our face. That was just part of life. What's happening here? This is the new world that we're living in. And I said, what do you expect me to do? Do you want me to take him to some room somewhere and, a soundproof room and discipline for some... And she looked at me like, oh! And then she invited somebody in to hear me say that, like she wanted to record it so she could turn me in. It's like, what? So of course I didn't repeat myself. I'm a little bit realizing what's coming down here. And I'm like, okay, Reagan, I guess it's time for us to go home and discipline you because you called somebody bad at math. Okay, let's go. Well, the next thing I know, a week later he does, and I can't discipline him for doing something like that. I said, Eric, you wasted my time, Reagan. Try to be nice to the kid. We know he's, slow, but, try and be nice to him. Can you? I really don't want to come back here again. So he does something else in a week. I get called a second time. And this time she wants to throw my kid out of 6th grade. There's 3 weeks left. He wants to throw him out of 6th grade, force him to repeat the entire class, the entire grade, for something stupid. It's something along the lines of, the guy was not good at English now, in addition to not being good at math. So I get called into the supervisor's office, and actually I go to the supervisor first because I'm smart enough to know if the first one who tells a story gets to tell the story and actually have it believed. The second person is like lost. So I call the supervisor first, say, hey, they're trying to throw my kid out. go in there and meet the supervisor. And I said, first, before we start, I want to tell you, we've had a couple kids go through your school. We love your school. We love the discipline you have. And I'm a person who believes in discipline. I'm not here to undercut any of your teachers. If anything, I want them to discipline my kids so that I don't have to. And if you want to do any of these things that we've talked about, I'm okay with that. And his mouth almost hit the table. He said, you know, you're the only person who's ever come in here and told me that. Every other helicopter parent out there wants to basically make life easier for their children and not prepare them for any of the difficulties that they ever have to face in the real world. He said, I'm on your side. I will tell the teacher that we had this talk, but try and keep him in line for the next 3 weeks so he can graduate, okay? Wink, wink. So thank God there's some sanity somewhere. So I leave the place. Of course, my son gets in trouble one more time because the woman wants to eject him. So she basically calls me and said, well, I talked to the supervisor and he wants to keep your son, so don't worry about it. I said, but we really loved your son and we really want what's best for him. And I said, if you really wanted what was best for him, you wouldn't have been running to the supervisor first to try and get him in trouble again. You would have been coming to me or you would have been talking to my son. So don't give me any baloney about how you care about your son. I care more about my son than you do. And I hope you understand that. And I expect him to graduate. And if you really care about my son, you'll make sure that he graduates and doesn't have to repeat a year. So I sort of let her have it, and thankfully my son actually got to graduate because these people have no idea how to discipline a child or how to raise a boy to be a man. And that's the worst thing that we're talking about here. We have lost the ability to raise men in our society. And what this teacher wanted is for me to drug my son and give him Ritalyn. Because most of the kids nowadays who are boys who have, unfortunately, no discipline either from their parents or from their teachers are being forced to become Ritalyn zombies. It's being encouraged, it's being pushed. And what's scary is I read a book recently called Brave New World. I don't know how many of you guys have read that book. But in that book, the answer to every crisis that can't be fixed through some other fashion is to give them soma, to give them drugs, to drug them in order to allow life to go on. Now, unfortunately, modern America is starting to resemble more and more this Brave New World that Aldous Huxley talked about. And I'm going to have a separate speech all about that at a different time. But there is a happy ending to this story. 2 years later, I'm at the Brigantine with my wife. We're having lunch. There's 12 of those teachers lined up, including Principal Wishy-Washy, Loosey-Goosey, Mamby-Pamby, Mollycollyism. And they are all told that there's just not enough money in the budget next year for you guys to be here. And I hope you guys enjoyed your meal. This is a public place. Try not to cry too much or throw a scene or mug me on the way to the door, but you all are going to have to find a different job. And I got to look over and see that principal, who had done her absolute best to get my son fired from the 6th grade, wait until all the other people had left and then come and cry to the supervisor and complain and moan about how she shouldn't be fired. And all I could think was, what goes around comes around. You reap what you sow. There absolutely is a God in this world, and prayer does work. All of those things went through my mind. So, the next time I'm up in Tacoma, and my brother Joe comes over and he says, you know, Erik, you really are a bit of an asshole sometimes. I'm going to look at him and say, well, thankfully, I had a great mentor. Fellow Toastmasters.
Yeah!